Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. Themes within PTE-AV-Studio are a collection of different slide styles that we can apply to a large number of images with just a few clicks. Without themes, and if we wanted a different slide style for most of the images in our presentation, we'd have to apply them one at a time. The slide styles we select to make up a theme could be completely different ones, or they could even be produced by different people. Our theme could be just a random selection of the slide styles, maybe our own favourites. But what often makes our presentations more appealing is when there's a nice flow from image to image. Now this can be achieved with slide styles, but it may be more appealing if we can maintain a certain style throughout the presentation, but maybe with sufficient variation that we add extra appeal. What I'm trying to explain here is that all of the styles in our theme are similar in nature, but not the same. So here we have a fairly simple idea to apply animation to one image, but then allow the next image to start its animation from where the previous one left off. And then if we continue this to image 3, 4 and 5, well, we're creating a naturally linked theme. My idea here is probably going to be easier to demonstrate than it is to explain, so let's make a start. I'm going to begin by going to File, New and starting a new project. I want to start a new project because I'm going to be making slide styles. At any time I can walk away from my PC. If I spot a problem with any of those styles a little bit later on, I can always open up the project and correct them. So it's good practice if you're making slide styles, which in our case are going to end up as a theme, then we save a project as we go. Let's make a start by selecting the first image. It doesn't really matter which image I use, but it may make things easier to follow if I start at the top and work my way down. So I'm going to double click this one and it'll appear in the slide list. I know I'm going to need more slide duration than what I've got here, so I'm going to increase that to about 14 seconds. Once I have that set, I can open up that image into the Objects and Animation screen. I want to add my background next, but before I do, I need to deselect the image. I'm actually deselecting it down here because when I select my background, I don't want the background connected to this image. If it was, then if we animate one, we could have the other one moving when we didn't intend that. So if we click into the grey area, the bounding box disappears, and if you look down at the bottom right, the selection on our image is now gone. So I can go and add another image, and the image I want is my background. Now I need to go to my pictures, and I'm working in themes. There's the background. Now of course my background has come up in the wrong place. I'm going to use keyboard shortcuts here to drop that below the image. Control, page down. But of course now my image is a little bit too big. So just for the moment I'll select the image and I'll drop the zoom down to about 85%. This may be a good time to remind you about which part of the image we're working on here is the main image and which part isn't. Remember, we're going to be making a slide style here. The image has to be the variable part, but we're going to have the background included with the slide style. So if I select my image for a moment and go to the Properties tab, because I selected my image first into the slide list a few moments ago, it's automatically ticked in the main object box and it was given the number 1. If we select the background, which I've called Woven D, we should see this box empty. because this part of the style is going to be applied every time. Now, just before we consider what sort of animation we're going to apply to the image here, I'd like to pick it out just a little bit better from the background, maybe a drop shadow and a very thin line. So I need to go down to the bottom right corner to select the image part, back to my border box and tick that. Quite often I find white's a little bit heavy, particularly, or a little bit bright I should say, particularly in a situation like this with a fairly dark image and a dark background. So I'm going to change the colour. I'm going to drop it down to sort of quite a mid-tone grey, something like that should do. But I'm also going to drop the width down to 2 or 3 pixels. Let's try 2. And with the bounding box in place, it's difficult sometimes to evaluate what we've applied. So if we just click into the grey area anywhere around the image, it just deselects the image for a moment and gives us a chance to evaluate it. But we have to remember though, if you look up at the center top of the screen, we are viewing this image at 50%. So if you'd really like to see the image as it's going to be seen in your slideshow, either do a full screen preview, or you can just adjust that size to 100% just to take a look. But I'm going to go back to my image here, and I'm going to go down to my shadow. I generally change the shadow. We can save our own custom shadow, which is a good idea. So if I click mine, you'll see in the templates here, I've got one called Barry's. It just adjusts the settings to something which is a little more appealing to my eye. So I'll click OK, and I'll click into that grey area once again. So you can see from the point of view of presenting the image, you can see what I've decided to do. Now I'm going to select my image, and one of the things you'll notice in the timeline here is we can see the fade of this image onto the screen as depicted by the grey bar on the left hand side. But because I've only got one image in my slide list, we're not seeing the grey bar on the right hand side, and I think we're going to need to do that. So just for a moment, I'm going to go up to the top right, close the objects and animation screen, and I'll just double click any image down there just to give me an anchor point. So when we go back to the image we're working on and back into the objects and animation screen, now you can see we've got the fade shown to us on the left, which is the fade onto the screen of this image, but we can also see the fade of the next image, which in effect is going to remove this one from the screen. Now we can think about animation. Now the animation that I've got in mind here is going to be simple and gentle, just to relieve that static nature of still images. We're going to position our keyframes after the first transition and before the next, because we need our animation to start once the image appears on screen, and we need it to stop the animation before it leaves the screen. Otherwise we'd have difficulty in lining up the next image with the animation of the first, and once again this will become a little more obvious as we do it. So I'm going to make a start by selecting my first keyframe. Once it's selected, I'm going to go back to my animation tab, and in the keyframe time, I know my fade onto the screen is 2 seconds. I want to make sure my keyframe is within that. So I'm going to allow the image to appear on screen and just be there for about half a second before it starts to move. So my first keyframe needs to be at the 2.5 second point. 2500 there, you can see the keyframe moves to the correct position. What I think I'll do next is clone this one. I'll just right click and clone a keyframe. This keyframe needs to be up here. Now we can see that at 12 seconds it starts to fade off screen. So we really could do with it coming to a stop, let's say around 10 seconds. Now we can just click and drag, as you can see here, or I could just dial in 10 seconds by 10, 0, 0, 0. So there I've got my starting keyframe and my ending keyframe. Maybe I've got a little too much there. Let's just adjust that to 11. That looks a little better. So we're going to start the animation at this point and end at this point. Because our image is going to begin animation on screen and visible, we need to apply some speed options here. And the ones that are appropriate are going to be smooth. So let's go up to the top right, add a modifier for the pan, animation speed smooth, the same for the zoom, and also the same for rotate. And of course, if you was going to add any other options here, you may want to consider them too. Now, speed options always need to be applied to the keyframe that starts the animation. I'm going to suggest we do an odd thing here. I'm going to apply them to the keyframe at the end as well. Now you'll see why in a few moments, but let me go back up and do exactly the same. Animation, smooth. Animation speed, smooth, and the same. So we've got a smooth animation on the pan, zoom, and rotate. What I'm going to do here is have my first keyframe exactly where this image is. So as the image fades on screen, that's exactly what we'll see. When it gets to this keyframe, now I'm going to add a little bit of a change. I'm going to use the click and drag method up here. We could go to the pan and we can click it over the X or the Y, doesn't matter which, and we can move the image that way. Or we could put the cursor into the box, such as the rotate box, and use the up and down arrows. I find that quite useful at times. And the same in the zoom, because I'd like to just drop the size of this down. But you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just moving it into a position like that. Let's test it just to make sure everything's okay. I'll put my cursor back at the start, press play. Nice smooth animation. Very gentle, just moving up to the left, and it comes to a gentle stop. So I think an important point here is to go up to the top right, close the objects and animation screen, and make sure we're saving our project. What we need to do next is to copy and paste all the work we've just done. Now the easiest way to do that is hold the Control key, hit the C key to copy, the V key to paste. As soon as I've done that, I'm going to select it and open up the Objects and Animation screen. Now I don't need to do anything with this picture to do what we're about to do, but it may make it a bit easier to follow. So on this occasion, I'll make sure my image is selected, and I'll go to the picture option here and I'll change it for image 2. Now what we need to do here is we need to have this image, because this image and its animation is a direct copy of the first. But at this first keyframe, we need this keyframe to be at the end of the animation of the previous image. The best way to achieve that, I think, is just to switch these keyframes around, which was why I suggested we put speed options into the keyframe with the first image, which meant nothing. Because when I swap them around, of course, they'll come into play and save us having to apply them every single time. So this keyframe, if that one's at 11, that needs to come to 2.5. This one needs to go to 11. So let me go to my animation tab and set that up. And this one to 2.5. And now all I've got to do is to adjust the animation, because the starting point is where the other one ended up. So now I can just change it by going to this keyframe and deciding what I want to do. I'll drop the size a little bit, I'll rotate a little bit that way, maybe that's a little bit too much, and I'll come this way and I'll come down a little. I think I'll straighten that up a little more and move it to the right a little more. You can see I like to nudge with the cursor in the object box there and just using those up and down keys. I find that quite convenient. Now, of course, as long as we're happy with that animation, we're done. So we can come back out of the objects and animation screen. And now all we need to do is to copy the second image in the same way as we did the first. Control C and Control V. Select it. Go back to the objects and animation screen. For the same reasons I described a few moments ago, I'll go to the properties and switch the image. So I'm now selecting image 3, just so when we test this in a little while, we can see images changing from one slide to another. I've got to do the same thing here with my keyframes. The one that's at 11 needs to be switched back to 2.5. And this one needs to be at 11. So there's the start of or the end of the animation of the previous slide. So I need to now adjust it to do whatever I want it to do. Now, on this occasion, let me straighten this up a little more. Just a little tilt that way, maybe a little tilt that way. Maybe I'll come this way a bit, a little bit larger perhaps. Further down, you can see the sort of thing that I'm doing. When I get to that point, I'm going to close. I'm going to remember to save my project, and another great shortcut once we've started saving is Control S. We're saving over the top of our previously saved project. But now would be a good point to test the 3 images we have. We're going to be creating slide styles from them, and eventually we'll transfer those to a theme. So we should be sure that we're on the right track here and everything is working as we expect. So let's take a look full screen. Remember, as the animation comes to an end, it's before the next image removes it, so we should see the image change, and then the next animation begins. So far, so good. As it comes to a stop, that image should fade on to the next one, and then this one is going to do that little gentle animation into the position we programmed. And the last image, of course, is just the holding file that I had sitting there. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, once I did that full screen preview and I was happy that I hadn't made any errors, then the rest is just a repetition of what we did with the first 3. Copy paste, adjust the animation and continue for as many variations as you wish to create. Now I went up to 8 variations because I happen to have 8 images in the file list. But with the last image, what I've done with the end point of the animation here, if I take you back into the objects and animation screen, this picks up from the image just before, but I'm returning this one to full square and central. Now if you remember, that's where we started the animation with the very first image at 85% zoom. So if I make a theme of these 8 slide styles, which we'll make in a moment, but then I applied them to 16 images, they'll follow on one after the other and they'll all work perfectly because the start of the next 8 will match the start of the first. So here we are back in our slide list, and I've selected the first of those images and I'm going to create a slide style from all 8. It's going to be quite quick to do. So with the first one selected, Styles and Themes is the option we want. We need to go into the Styles tab and the Tools to create a style. I'm going to create a category for these. I'll say themed animation, for want of a better category, and here in the first style I'll just call that number 1. As you know, in the author section I could put something like my website in there, Have I got that right? Type in a slightly darkened room. Sometimes it's difficult to see the keys on the keyboard, and if we needed to make any comments about the slide styles, we could do so here. I can't think of any that need to be placed in there, so I'll leave it blank. So I'm happy with that. I'll create it, select the next one, and go back and do it again. The good thing here is if we go to Tools and Create Style, we go back to the themed animation, so all I've got to do is change the number and create. And of course, you're probably well ahead of me, I need to do the same for the other 6. Once I've got all of those slide styles created, I'm going to use those to create a theme. So let's come back to our Styles and Themes button. This time I'm going to go into my themes and to the tools, and I'm going to create a theme. And the first thing I think I'll do is to give the category the same name. So I think I called it a themed animation, and my theme name is, I've got linked images and I've got 8 of them just for want of a title. Of course, as per usual, I could put my website here and also any comments that are required. Now I need to select the styles that I want to use. Well, I can see them just here. So I'll just click this little arrow and they'll open up, and I'll tick the box because I want to use all of them, and I want to use all of them in the order we can see them here. We do get other choices. We can select particular slide styles to be the first or the last, or we can apply them in a random order. But that's not the idea here. They're all linked together, so in theory everything should be good to go. I'm going to click OK. What we need to do next is to test the theme to make sure it works as we expect. To do that, we're going to have to clear these slides away. So before I do that, I'll hit Ctrl S just to make sure before I clear that list I've got my project saved. So I'll use the Shift key. I've got the end slide selected, and I'll select the first and I'll delete. Now I can add all of these images. I'll select them in one go. And what I'll do here is I'll drag them down into sets. So let's assume we've actually got 16 different images, but we can remember that between this one and this one, the link between the themes should work perfectly. Now I need to go to my styles and themes, but I do need to remember to select all 16 images first. Styles and themes. Make sure we select the theme tab. There's my themed animation. There's my linked 8. I can apply that. Everything looks pretty good. Well, we know that the slide styles all work because we've already run a full test on those. So I suppose what I should do is go directly to this image maybe, and we'll just run a full screen preview of that to see how the number 8 slide style matches with the first one of the next 8. So let's do that. I'll use the option at the extreme bottom right corner of the mini player, and that'll take us to a full screen preview from the image we have selected. So there's the last image of our theme, which should bring our image full square and 85% zoomed. And there's the start of the next 8, a repeat of the first 8, but they link up rather nicely. How many slide styles do you want to make? Well, that's a personal choice. So there we have our slide styles created and within a theme that we can apply in just a few seconds. I think the triptych technique would also lend itself to linked animations, something like this, and it would provide a fair degree of creative choice between the 3 images on how they appear on screen. Maybe we'll look at that sometime. I am going to include this theme and also the slide styles, so you can try them out on your own PC if you wish. You'll find a link below. Incidentally, the images I'm using here were originally created for an English Civil War slideshow, and I'll link to that below also. It's one of my personal favourites. The filters I used for these images was Topaz impression filters, and I do have a couple of video tutorials on how these effects were created. I'll link to those below too. Don't forget to subscribe if you're a YouTube viewer, and give my video a thumbs up if you think it's worth it, of course, and I'll see you next time.